So good afternoon, folks, and welcome to this UCCX COIC reporting webinar. My name is Bruce Wilkinson, and I'll be hosting this 1-hour session where hopefully we'll be able to give you some introductions into what we believe at Sunset Learning is a new approach to the task of COIC reporting training. We have an agenda that we'll follow. And I guess why we're here is that from our observation, traditionally reporting classes have run, say, 2 or 3 days, or maybe, sometimes even 4. And while they've been able to be fairly, successful, I believe, in terms of the navigation and access in and around the product, it seems to us that they often fall a little short on the reporting requirements, the specific reporting requirements of attendees. And because there are, multiple reports, it's impossible in the time that we have to drill down to give individuals exactly the sort of information they want on their reports. So what we've done as an organisation is to say enough of that. Let's see if we can make it more efficient for our students and our customers, and at the same time offer a more detailed, private mentoring and report analysis follow-up for those that need it. So what that means is that rather than say a 2 or 3 day class, we've now been able to compress all of that generic navigation, access, security profiles into 1 day, albeit a fairly busy day, but a 1 day saving you guys that additional investment in time. And then should you need it, you can approach us for a private mentoring report analysis session. That will require some follow-up and some meetings and things of that nature, which we're prepared to do. So in this session, we're going to give you, I guess, an overview of what we will be covering in that 1 day session. And we'll be talking here about how we access the product. We'll talk a little bit about security profiles. We'll give you some overview in terms of the reports and show you how those reports might be, customized. But again, in a sort of a fairly generic overview. We have joining our session today a couple of Sunset Learning folks, Steve Haywood and Nate Mingle, and those guys will be supervising or managing the Q&A, and you will notice in your Zoom menu bar, if you like, a little Q&A icon down the bottom, I think, or up the top, wherever you've got that structured on your screen. If you click on that, it opens up a Q&A session, and both Nate and Steve will be monitoring that fairly closely and be able to handle maybe some of those questions on the fly, maybe refer some more technical ones to me, or maybe suggest that we will, get back and follow up. Speaking of questions, there is a couple of questions that we would like you to complete right now, and I'll open up each of these questions. There are only 2, and give you 30 seconds or so to respond to those. So let's take a look at the first question in terms of Contact Center Enterprise. Are you currently using Contact Center Express? So if you could take, say, 30 seconds just to let us know your response to that. What you're looking at here initially is the login screen for UCCX administration. I do need to show you some things via that screen as we're going through, but in order for us to get access, the first in the pillars, access to the COIC reporting class, the COIC reporting server, what we need is just this URL, And we need the fully qualified domain name of our UCCX server, which in our case is UCCX125 main.uccx.edu. Now, I could use the port extension, or I could just use that URL and then click on the Contact Center Express reporting link. That port extension, by the way, is 8444. I tend sometimes to forget those details, so I just am happy to use this initial URL and then go straight to the Unified Contact Center Express reporting, where you will get your login name. Now, I'm going to log in as the administrator, which is a default super user, if you will, that's created at install. And the reason I'm going to do that is that that particular login, that administrator, gives me access to pretty much everything that COIC has to offer. I'll show you a little later just what other logins you can provide for your more broadly distributed users, because you don't want everybody, of course, to have that super user credential. So if we look down here at this COIC homepage, there are a number of links down the left-hand side that gives you access to all of the tools. All of the tools associated with the product. Let's just take a look at some of the tools that you're more likely to have come across than others, at least initially. There is a dashboards link, and on that dashboards link, it provides you with the ability to create particular dashboards, which are really just visual favorites, if you will. And one of the things that I can do as an administrator and or as a user, given the right permissions, is to create a particular dashboard. So let's just do that very quickly. If I first go to new, let's create a folder initially, and I'll call this folder webinar for want of a better name, and click save. And now I have a dashboard folder. If I click on that folder and click new, I can now create a dashboard that will sit in that folder. We'll call it again webinar and click OK. And I now have a dashboard that's called webinar, but you can see that clearly there's nothing on it. So now the job of the individual who's creating this dashboard is to say, what do I need on this dashboard, which again is a visual favorites, which should, provide a shortcut, if you will, to, my most popular or my most used reports. If you look, very, very closely, there's a little washed out add widget icon. And if I click on that, it gives me the opportunity to add a report or maybe a sticky note or even a URL. Let's add a report. And the report that I'm going to select is going to be from the stock reports, the UCCX historical folder. I'm looking at my inbound reports, and I'll just pick one at random, the agent all fields report. And the view that I want is, again, the all fields report. Now, there's no easy way to determine what particular those particular views look like, other than exposure, if you will. So if I look at all of that and click done, then you'll see on my dashboard now, I have a particular report. If I go back to my dashboards, let's just close that. Go back to dashboards, webinar, and run through that once more. Click a new dashboard. Okay. Add that report. From the stock, historical, inbound, agent all fields, the grid view, and click done, and click save, which I think I omitted in the first place. I should now have a dashboard. Notice here I've got a filter, and in order to run the report, I do need to select a filter. I'm going to say, because this is an historical report, I'll pick, probably stuff that's happened all this month. I won't bother being too discreet. I'll just select, give me every agent that you're aware of from these parameter selections, populating this report to its capacity, and click run. And now on this report is my agent all fields report. Now, we're not seeing a terrible amount of data because, again, this is a lab platform, so you don't see a whole lot of stuff for many of the reports. But let's just close that. And again, show you the benefit, if you like, of the dashboard structure. If I go to my dashboards, there is my webinar dashboard that I just created. It's in a folder. And straight away that agent all fields report comes up. Now, what's the benefit of that and other reports that I may have created? Well, some people live and breathe by their dashboards. Others suggest that they're not so handy because I can still get to that agent all fields report, as you might suggest, by the reports link. And the reports link, of course, is where I see all of my reports. Now, you're looking here at a deployment which not only has the default stock reports, which come with the product, but from earlier classes, a number of students have created folders and reports as part of that class. If I open up the stock reports, go to the UCCX historical, go to the inbound, then again, here are all of those reports that we're looking at, including that agent all fields report that we looked at as a sort of a temporary approach before. So clearly I can get to my reports, I can get to those objects that I put on the dashboard via a couple of navigational points. Let's take a look at probably what is a more common report that we might be interested in. Let's say a CSQ activity report. Again, I'll just look at maybe the range this month, and I'll select the entire report range. Look at all of the CSQ names and objects that are associated with the class. Now, clearly in our one-day report, we'll go in a lot more depth as to the significance of these selections. And you'll see now my reports are available. I've got a number of skills, some start and end times associated with this activity, the CSQ name that's associated with those skills. Now, here's one thing. I guess if you're looking at this without any prior UCCX understanding at all, then you might be asking yourself, well, what's a CSQ and what's a skill, etc. And again, part of what we would do in our sort of one-day exposure is spend a little bit of time explaining the architecture and the configuration of our UCCX environment. But calls presented, calls handled, calls abandoned, etc. And you can see that, perhaps that's going to be a fairly useful report. We have service levels, percentages of calls answered within whatever service level threshold is set for those particular CSQs. So we'll come back to our reports in just a little while, but let's move on down the link here. Recognizing, as we go, let me close that for the moment, that there are multiple reports. And this is really what I guess I was alluding to in our initial introduction, that while, 2 or 3 students in a public class might be really interested in these 3, another 2 or 3 students might be really interested in these 3, and so on. And our experience in providing this training is that, it's very, very rare that an entire population in a public class of students are interested in drilling down and analysing those same reports. Hence this approach that we're getting to. Some other generic stuff that you need to be aware of is our report definitions. The definition of a report definition is just the SQL statement that goes out to the UCCX database and returns the data associated with that report. And the job of COIC then is to render that report in a readable way. Again, if we look at the stock UCCX historical inbound, noting along the way that there are report definitions and reports for multi-channel, for email, for chat, etc. So there's a vast array of available reports. Now, here's one little tiny, what should I say? It's not a dilemma, an issue with UCCX compared with Contact Center Enterprise. Both of them run COIC. Both of them have report definitions associated with all of the stock reports and indeed, reports that we might create. However, in UCCX, most of these report definitions, if I just select one, are what's referred to as stored procedures. In other words, all we do in UCCX is to create a command, in this case, stored procedure custom_variable, which goes out to the UCCX database and runs the procedure on that database, as opposed to delivering the SQL command from this screen. Now, why is that a problem? Or why is that an issue? What it means is we don't, as users, as folks that may want to create a custom report definition or SQL statement, don't have the benefit of taking the stock report definition and just tweaking it here and there, because we don't have access to that detail. Now, could we get into the stored procedure on the UCCX database itself? Yes, it's technically possible, but it's way beyond the expertise of your average UCCX report user. In fact, there are a number of organizations that make a living getting into and changing around these particular stored procedures. So park that for a moment, but we'll come back and show you well, what does that mean if I want to create a report definition and a subsequent report? What it means is you do it from scratch, okay? And that gets you very quickly into SQL query statements and things of that nature. So let's close that. We're moving through. We've seen our dashboards, our reports, our report definitions. There is a thing here called a value list.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes.
We do have one question. I guess someone is not able to see report definitions on the CYC. Is there a reason they would not be able to see that?
Yes, there is, and it has to do with permissions, and we will deal with that in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Perfect.
You're talking about the fact that when that particular user logs in, report definitions are not available to that individual.
That's how I understand it, yeah.
Okay.
And it probably is permissions. That makes sense.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons why I've logged in as the administrator, which gives me access to everything. Given that the question has been raised now, let me jump ahead quickly and go to this configure permissions. And here's where you will see either via groups or users, the ability to provide permissions to dashboards, reports, and including report definitions to individual users. And you'll notice here in our case, we've assigned at least a view permission to all of our particular agents. But in the case of the questioner, if they went to this point, you would not see these permissions inherited. Notice that we've got the ability to define view or edit. What that means is that the individual user that we're creating then has the opportunity to write to that report definition screen. But if you don't have a view, then you're not even going to be able to see that report definition as a particular user. So hopefully that answers that question. Later on, I'm going to come back and we're going to play with these and just see the impact, of permissions on not only reports but on dashboards and other things. So going back now to value lists, some mysterious sort of link, if you will, in COIC. What is this thing called a value list? Well, essentially, a value list is nothing more than a predetermined list of all similar database objects that is brought into COIC by default. And you'll see things like users, agents, agent name, application name, call types. All of these names here essentially would reflect tables within the database, the UCCX database, and they're all bringing back all of that information. Now, why is that useful? Well, it's useful because when I want to run a report, let's say an agent summary report, then we need to know, what agents are out there. And this report uses that agent value list in order to present to us, a series of values that come from those tables and associated records. Now, you might be running a UCCX deployment that has, 200 agents or 400 agents or buku agents. And every time you run an agent report, or in fact any other report, you don't want to sort of go through and just either create them all and run reports on them all, or select just the ones you need each and every time you want to do something. So therefore, associated with the value list is also this subset of a value list called a collection. And what a collection is a series or as I say, a subset of those value lists that allow you to be more discrete when you are selecting those objects that you want to report on. For instance, I don't necessarily want to report on every agent, just maybe agents 1 through 4. Well, I could do that, and I could do that in my reports by just selecting agents 1 through 4. Now, how am I able to do that? Well, I'm able to do that because a collection has been created that allows me to choose that more discrete filter. There are a number of value lists that are created by default. There are a number of collections that are created by default. If you have the right permissions, again, it's all about permissions, you can create your own collection or your own value list for a particular system. Now, that's the same here in UCCX as it is in Enterprise. My experience has been that it's unlikely that you need to create too much customization within value lists and collections, because the product developers have done, I believe, a pretty good job in creating those. But for now, we should just be aware that this is what our value lists and collections are all about. Moving down then to configure. In this case, because again I'm logged in on as the super administrator, I see permissions, I see users, groups, and data sources. Permissions we've had a little look at already, and we've seen that it gives me the ability to assign, view, or edit permissions to particular users, based on the particular object that I'm looking at. Say, for instance, reports. We can, again, inherit permissions for agents to view all of these reports, but whether or not I can edit or change them in any other way depends on whether or not I have this particular permission. So there is at least that in terms of more broadly disseminating the ability of an individual to run or even edit a report. Let's take a look at an example here. And let me go back to configure. And I'll go to users. And you might notice a really useful tool, if you will, in COIC is the ability for this super administrator, the super user guy, to select any agent or any user. And I'll just take agent 03 as an example. And I'll come across to the little action button here, and I will select Run As. Now, to all intents and purposes, I have logged in as agent 03. Take a look at what I am not seeing. I am not seeing report definitions, okay? Case in point, because agent 03 has not been assigned those the ability to manage or view those report definitions. Let me go to reports, stock, and what else do I not see? I do not see UCCX historical reports. Well, that might seem strange, you might ask, because surely if I go back to my user, you can see it looks like I've got permissions report viewer and report designer. It looks like they're all checked. And in fact, you're right, they are. So here's the rub. And this is, again, part of what is going to be necessary when you're creating, if you will, your security profiles. So if I go now to my UCCX server itself, let me log in as a UCCX administrator, and we've got several here. I need to make sure I get the right one, student 00A, and log in. If I go to Tools, User Management, Reporting Capability View. It's Tools, User Management, Reporting Capability View. You find that there is some action required to take all of the available users that are coming up from Active Directory via Call Manager into UCCX, but that's another story, to be an historical report user. Notice here that my user, Agent 03, has no such privilege. Let's change that. Let's select that guy and make them an agent, an historical user. If I click Save, this fellow is now an historical report user. Go back to COIC. Probably might need to do a refresh. I'm still logged in as or running as Agent 03. Let's go back to my reports. Do my refresh. And lo and behold, I can now see my historical reports. So here's something that we really try to drum into folks who come along to our classes. If you are not seeing an object or a report that you expect to see as a particular user, it's almost certainly, I always hesitate to say certainly because life is not like that, but it's almost certainly going to be either the fact that historical reports have not been assigned to that user in UCCX, or if they have, here in the permissions to those particular reports have not been assigned. And the other thing, I guess, to note with respect to that is that you find that those permissions are not inherited down the tree. So I might have permissions to a particular report to view it, but if I don't have permissions to for the folder that report has been saved to, I don't even get to be able to see it. So you need to be sort of careful as an administrator that your permissions are assigned as appropriate. Okay, something we spend quite a bit of time on that that one-day class, making sure that we all understand our security profile requirements fully. Coming down to the Schedules tab, let me stop the run as here. And I'm back as the administrator now. Notice dashboards, report definitions have returned. If I look at the schedules, this is where I would get the opportunity to create schedules to deliver particular emails or reports via email or some other SFTP delivery to a particular administrator or manager, etc., etc. So we have the ability to create those schedules from that screen, again, provided that I have the appropriate permissions. Okay, so let's go back to our reports, because clearly one of the things that people are always interested in is, how do I change the look and feel of a particular report? And that leads us into two areas: customizing report views and building custom reports themselves. And that's very different. Yes, sir?
Before you move on here, I have one more question for you.
Yep.
If I set the permissions on a folder, will I automatically get access to any reports in that folder?
No, you do not. And that's why I was mentioning reports are not automatically inherited, up or down. Sorry, permissions are not automatically inherited up or down. So you need to make sure that not only do you have permissions to view or edit the report, but also view or edit, the folder that report's in. And that's a bit tedious, to be honest, okay? Particularly if you're doing that permissions, let's go back there. If you're creating those permissions on an individual by individuals. And what's often, a better approach is to define user groups who have, similar status, let's use that term, and could benefit from the same permissions being assigned. But yeah, you don't, if I look at the, the reports, say the stock reports, historical, inbound, and the particular reports, then I'm going to need to assign, permissions here, 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 here. Now, seems to me, in my experience, that, there are, for whatever reason, sometimes you do find that inheritance does take place. But in my experience, I find it more effective and more efficient to just assume that it's not, and at least check all the way down, the tree to the particular report that I'm wanting to assign as a particular user. And that, that's assigned for groups as shown here, or for, individual users themselves. Same sort of deal. Okay, let's go back to our reports. One of the things we were saying was that, very often what we want to be able to do is to create a custom report, or at least a custom report view. Again, in order to be able to achieve this sort of thing, then we're going to need the appropriate permissions. So if I look, for instance, I'm logged in as the administrator, so clearly I do have all those permissions. If I log in as, some other user, you would find this new button here is grayed out. Why? Because I do not have write permissions to this top level reports folder. Again, permissions help us with that. So what I'm going to do is stay logged in as the administrator, just so I can run through the process without having to worry about permissions. Realize if you wanted to give this to Agent X, then Agent X would need to be assigned the appropriate permissions using, the techniques that we've alluded to. So what do I need to do? Well, normally what I need to do is to create a new folder. That just makes sense. So I'll just create a folder called webinar, and I'll click save. And this is where my new reports are going to be saved to. or my report view. Now, why is that important? Well, because if I look at my stock reports, inbound, sorry, let me not do that. Let me pick a CSQ activity report. I'll select this month. I'll select the entire report range and run the report. And you'll notice it's got a whole bunch of stuff here, right? The skills, the CSQ name, calls presented, calls handled, calls abandoned, etc. But really all I want to do is I want to run a service level report. So all I want to do for this application, if you will, is to run this same report, but I want the skills, I want the CSQ name, and I want to see the service level values that are listed here. How do I do that? Well, you'll notice if you look at the tools available to a stock report, I have no editing capability at all. So what I then need to do, let me close this report. I'm now looking at the contact service queue common skill activity report. And what I'm going to do is going to do a save as and save it as webinar. And I'm going to put it into the folder that I created just for this purpose. I'll clone the report definition, which means essentially it's going to be exactly the same report, right? It's just saved in another location on an at another name, and I'll just save that in the report definitions as well and click save. Oh, I need to give it a name. And so now I have essentially a report. It should be in the webinar folder called webinar. Notice what I've now got the ability to do is a whole bunch of things, including edit. Why is this? Because even though it's the same report, it's not in the stock report. It no longer has the stock report status. This is mine. So I can click edit. I can give it a version number, probably spell it correctly. Oh, I see. Okay. And I'm going to edit now, let's say this particular view. And here, this is the summary, if you like, of what we were looking at. Okay, it had the CSQ name, the interval start time, the interval end time, all of that sort of stuff. But I don't want that in my new report, right? I do want the skills still. The interval start time, I don't want that. So let's see if I can remove it. The interval end time, let's say I can move it. The CSQ name, yeah, we did still want that. The calls presented, nope. Nope. Now, the reason I stumbled over that is these, in fact, are headers which contain a whole bunch of stuff. So unlike the fields that allowed me just to move from one, the available to the selected, where I see the header, there's a slightly different exercise. So I'll select it and remove the header, select the calls abandoned, remove it. The service level, I'm maintaining. The average handle time, I don't think I wanted that. Max handle time, total calls handled. This is going to be a very simple report, but it illustrates the point, hopefully. So let's save this entry. I'm going to give it another name. Let's call it Webinar Service Level View, and click Save and Finish. And now I have my report. Still want the entire report range. Click Run. And while it's checking for stuff, notice that this is now my report. A very, very clean report if all I was interested in was service levels. Now, one of the things that we'll talk about on the session on the one day is how we might add thresholds and things of that nature to those reports. So I'm looking at the time and we're getting close to the end, but I do want to add one other thing. That's changing the view. It's got nothing to do with how we might change or build a custom report from scratch. Remember, our reports are all dealt with from our report definitions. So let me go back here and go to report definitions. And what I want to do perhaps is now create a new report definition just for this process. Now I'll go to new.
Hey, Bruce.
Yeah.
Before you jump into that, I've got one other question for you.
Yes, sir.
When removing a supervisor, how can I see the reports connected with that user? The reports, the dashboards, everything that's connected to that user ID. Is there a way to see that?
If that object is removed, if that supervisor is removed as a user, yeah, I would. Well, it's an interesting question. It's not something that I think I've looked at exactly, but I'm going to say that that historical data is preserved. For instance, if I run a historical report of, say, last week when that supervisor agent was around and I saw the activity for that individual, if I removed that individual from the configuration, I'm going to say that if I ran a report, for last week or last month or whatever, the date range is, then I believe I would still see that object. But I'm saying that a little bit hesitantly because I have to say I've never experimented with that to the nth degree. So maybe that's something I should follow up. So if you can maybe get that person, Steve, and we'll get back with a more definitive answer.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I want to create a new report definition. We've already created one here. Sorry, let me go back. Where we created a report definition and we just said select start from skill. Now, what does that all mean? Well, for this example, it simply means that there is within UCCX an SQL database, of course, and the details of that database are available within the UCCX documentation. And our job, I guess, as UCCX administrators, reports administrators, etc., is not necessarily to know the ins and outs of SQL. Good if we do, but we at least need to know what tables are out there and what data is present in those tables. And if, as I say, if you just do a search on UCCX schema, it will show you all of the tables, the detail, how the calculations are provided, etc. And this is where we're getting into that more detailed mentoring. Let's take a look together at exactly what you want to see and see how we might drag that from the database into your system. I've just done a very simple exercise here saying select everything from the table skill. Okay, so that's what I've got. Let me just close that. I won't bother doing that again. It's really just opening up that screen and building it. But what I do want to do is create a report that utilizes that skill definition. So let me go back to reports. I'll look in the webinar folder. I'll sort of put it here and I'll create a new report. I'll call it webinar 2. Won't bother about a description at this point. And here is where it's asking me for a report definition. Well, we have all of those stock report definitions, but realize that we also created a skill test report definition, which was just saying, give me everything from the skill table. If I click next, the fact that it comes back and gives me the opportunity now to manage views and thresholds, things we'll talk about in our one-day class, tells me that that was a valid statement, and I can just click next and click finish, and I now have a report called webinar 2. If I open that up, select a particular field. Now I'm just going, because I want everything to come back, I'm just going to say, well, I don't want that actually. Let me go back. Profile ID not equal to 999. You want to delete that field and run that. That's just a little trick that says I'm not quite sure what those values should be, but if I say it's not equal to something crazy, then I should get back everything. Now, I'm not even going to sort of analyze what this report tells me or shows me, but rather just say that we've just very quickly gone through and in the one hand showed you how to change the view of a report by manipulating the stock report, and in the second process, now how to create a truly custom report that doesn't exist anywhere in the stock reports that come with the product. But because we've been able to write, in our case, a very simple report definition, we've been able, if you like, to create our own report, such as it is. The more useful reports, might create a more complex query statement that not only points to one table, but joins to another table, has some query, parameters associated with it, etc. And that's when you start to get into, if you will, the SQL query sort of expertise out of your pure UCCX environment. And that's taken us through to, I think, our 1 hour session. So hopefully that gives you an insight into the sorts of things we'll cover in clearly a much less rushed approach in our 1 day class. Well, it's still a lot to get through, to be perfectly honest, in a 1 day class. So if you're going to come to that class on July, whenever it is, make sure you have a good night's sleep the night before, because we'll be hitting the keyboard and we'll be building all of that stuff up. But the goal and the role of that 1 day class is to equip you to move into, a more detailed analysis of your specific environment that you might be deploying in your organization. And if you then need some more assistance in some of this customizing that we've talked about, then let us know and we can help you in that arena as well. So I think that's all for me. There was that one other poll question. That I can now launch. Are you considering moving your contact center? So if I can ask you to hang about for another couple of moments while you answer that second poll question. And I guess in the 4 minutes that are remaining, while you're doing that poll, let me again thank you for showing up. I appreciate your attention and your attendance at this seminar. Hopefully you were able to get something from it, and we'll see some of you back in our 1 day class.
Yeah, Bruce, you want to put that slide up one more time for the class?
Yes, ma'am, I can do that. That it?
Thank you, Bruce.
Hey. Okay. Any other questions coming in?
We're good for now.
Good for now. Still have a couple of folks out there, so I'll hand it over to my fellow panelists to round it up.
I do have one question I could ask you, Bruce.
Yep.
Interesting question, actually. What effect on CPU does running large reports have on the servers? And if I'm getting CPU,
that is a very good question, and it's something that we didn't handle here. There is, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there is a limit not only to server performance, but also the number of simultaneous users that can be running historical reports. And if within the UCCX embedded environment. And if an organization needs to go beyond that, then there is the possibility to integrate a second standalone server that can be, again, integrated with UCCX. And that it's interesting, because that doesn't necessarily change the load on the server that much, because it's still dragging data, back from the server. But it does change or take the actual COIC cycles, computer cycles, off the server onto the standalone server. So it used to be that you needed the COIC standalone server to be able to do the sorts of customizing we did in the last 10 minutes. That's clearly now not the case, because everything we did today was on the embedded COI server, getting it to it via the UCCX URL. But should you want more users, or should you want to be, say, lighten the load in a capacity sense, then you might consider a standalone. The standalone COIC is exactly the same in terms of permissions, access, all of those sorts of things as the embedded version.
Good. And an interesting follow-up question too. If I'm getting CPU issues, am I able to find out who is running these reports?
Well, that sounds very Big Brotherish to me, Steve. I'm not sure I even want to answer that. No, I don't know. Let me think. I'm going to say the answer is yes. And the reason is there are a number of COIC reports themselves. And while I haven't seen them, I'm sure that information would be there.
Got it. All right. I think that wraps it up. Bruce, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for attending. And we'll leave it at that.
All righty. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, participants. Enjoy your reporting. Job's not done till the paperwork's finished.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.